Go for it.
Hello ladies, we are going to begin talking a little bit about our fertility right now, and we split you up into different sessions so that we could really answer some questions later on that you may have that you don't want anyone else hearing about. But before we begin any of that, we're going to take a little pre-test. So if you would turn to page 8 for the teens and page 9 in your booklet for the moms. And we'll just give you 3 minutes to do that pre-test, and we'll review the answers and see how you did. Okay, so if everyone can put your pens down, or actually just correct your own papers. The answers are false, false, true, 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 false, false, true, false. Now, did anybody get 100% on their test? Not very many. Well, that's okay, because you're going to have a chance to learn this. Scientists themselves are learning new things about fertility all the time, so this is a great opportunity for you to maybe learn some new things about yourself and about how our bodies work. And also, if you already know a lot about human reproduction, we think that you'll find this presentation to be very fascinating. So,
all right, well, let's get started. You probably recognize this beautiful painting that was done by Michelangelo. Does anyone know the name of it? Can you tell me? Yeah. Right. It's his painting of creation. And you can see on the painting that there's a picture of God the Father extending his finger to Adam and giving him life. But what a lot of people don't see in this picture is that here is also a picture of Eve, and you can see that God the Father actually has his arm around Eve, and he's presenting her, in a sense, to Adam. And behind Eve, if you look very closely, you can even see the children that God is going to prepare through the union of Adam and Eve as his gift of creation to them. So this is a very, very powerful painting by Michelangelo, and we know that there's a lot of discussion about evolution and creation and how it actually all happened. We don't know exactly, but what we do know and what is important is that creation, the act of creating a new life, is a wonderful gift from God. And we all need to realize that the way that creation takes place, that God has allowed us to participate in this wonderful act of creation, is through the act of intercourse between a man and a woman. We usually refer to this as sex. And what's God's plan exactly when it comes to sex? Well, it's simply this, that a man leaves his mother and father and cleaves to his wife, and that together they form one flesh. And in forming this one flesh and becoming one, they create a new life. And that is all part of God's plan.
so the church asks each and every one of us to discover ourselves, namely 2 things: to come to know our bodies, our physical bodies, and to also come to know our sexual powers. Well, think about this. Knowledge of our sexual powers should lead us to respect for ourselves and for others. So every young man should look upon every young woman that he meets as an image and likeness of God, and deserving to be loved and treated and respected as an image and likeness of God. In just the same way, every young woman who meets a young man should look at that young man as an image and likeness of God, and should realize that he deserves to be loved, respected, and treated as an image and likeness of God. So puberty, that's a question that lots of us have on our minds right now. Most young people become aware of their sexual powers when some really obvious body changes begin taking place. These changes take place because of the sex hormones. When they begin to be secreted in our bodies start to change. Puberty usually occurs between the ages of 10 to 13, and oftentimes it starts a little bit earlier for girls than for boys.
You know what, Erin? it is really miraculous the way that God has made the human body. For example, I never knew, but I learned by studying these things, that men and women have the exact same hormones in their bodies. They just act differently upon the different organs within the bodies. And some of you may not be familiar with the names of what these are, but one of them is called the follicle stimulating hormone, and the other one is called the luteinizing hormone. These are chemical messages that are released actually by the brain. And the brain is really the master organ when it comes to our sexuality. Particularly that part of the brain at the base, which is this little gland here, and it's called the pituitary. I'm sure some of you have heard of that before. Well, what does this gland do? Does anybody know? It releases something. Releases hormones. These two hormones that I was just telling you about, it releases them and they flow through the bloodstream, and they actually contribute to other organs acting in certain ways. And they act differently depending upon whether the person is a man or a woman. For a man, for example, the follicle stimulating hormone, which is also known as FSH, and the luteinizing hormone, which is known as LH, have an effect upon the testes. And the testes would be this part of a man, which is located here in a little pouch which we call the scrotum. And it's in this little pouch that the testes are held, and within the testes are produced the sperm cells. And those are the key cells in the man's body that contribute to the creation of new life. Also in the testes, they have another very important function, and that is they produce a certain kind of hormone, very specialized hormone. It's called testosterone. And this is the hormone that really makes a man, causes his voice to become deeper. He will grow hair on his chest, on his legs, sometimes under his arms, in his pubic area. And these changes are all brought about by the brain, the pituitary gland, and these hormones that are secreted. Now in the female, we got the same hormones. They just are at different levels, and they come and go at certain times of the month. So we would have those two hormones. Does anyone remember what they are? Right, FSH, that's one. And the other one was LH, good. These hormones in the female actually have a different effect. They stimulate the ovaries, which are these two small glands on either side here, on either side of the uterus. And when they stimulate the ovaries themselves do something really miraculous. They produce their own hormones, even though they're not part of the brain. They actually produce two very important hormones, the most important female hormones, which are estrogen, I'm sure many of you have heard about that, and also progesterone. And just like testosterone gives the male his male characteristics, well, estrogen and progesterone are responsible for giving the female her female characteristics. So what would those be? Anybody? Right? Her breasts, definitely. That's a big difference between men and women. Okay, yes, I mean, women are shaped differently. They do have rounded hips. That's part of it. What else do you think that these hormones would do for a woman? Ah, good. Yes, they give her her period every month. They give her her menstrual cycle. And it's important to remember that this menstrual cycle that a woman goes through is really another great gift of God. What that does is that allows her to be able to carry a child, to have a baby. And so it's important to remember that this great gift of sexuality and all of these hormones and everything we have going on inside of our bodies is part of God's great plan, actually to bring forth new life.
So here we have Ready, Steady, and Miss Roller Coaster to help us demonstrate how differently the hormones act in the male and the female. So if you take a look here at Ready, Steady, all of his hormone levels are going on an even playing field. And man's hormone levels are usually steady during his entire lifetime. But a woman's hormone levels look a little bit different. We can see this roller coaster, she's going up and down all the time. Does anyone think that this could be possible for women having different mood changes? Yes, it's well established that that's true. In males, though, the hormones are secreted at the same level throughout his entire life. Because of that, we can say that
Constant Carl, our friend here, men are always fertile. Okay, ladies, what does that mean to be fertile? To be fertile? Yeah, what it really means is to always be capable of producing new life. So a man, from the time he goes through puberty all the way to the last day before he dies, is always fertile. But it's not necessarily that way with women. Women have what we call a cycle, which is quite different.
So here is an enlarged picture of sperm. They're the male's reproductive cells, and they're very unique. They're different from every other part of the male's body. All of his other cells have 46 chromosomes. Sperm only have 23 chromosomes, and we'll hear a little bit more why later. But all the genetic material is provided in the heads of each of the sperm, and the tails are what help propel the sperm and enable them to travel. And this sperm is the father's genetic contribution to new life.
Okay, so we may be asking ourselves, well, where do these sperm actually come from? We know that they're the key to producing a new life, but what is really the function of the male reproductive system? So let's go ahead and take a look at this and try to make our way through this diagram of the male reproductive system. We already talked about the hormones, right? That they would be produced and come through the bloodstream, and that they would affect this organ right here. Does anyone remember what that was? Good, right, the testicles. The testicles actually are inside. We refer to this organ as the testes. So when the FSH and LH stimulate the testes, we said that testosterone is produced. Now, does anyone know what this pouch is? We talked about a little pouch there. What the name of that is? No? That's called the scrotum, okay? And if you can tell from the diagram, this actually hangs down from a male's body. So it's not inside his body like the female organs are, it's below his body. And there's a very good reason for that. The reason is that sperm cannot be produced within a warm environment. So they have to actually be outside of the body. And that's what the purpose of the scrotum is for. It actually keeps the testicles at the temperature that they need to be able to produce healthy sperm. Now, what happens after that? You may ask yourself, well, where are these sperm actually kept inside of the testes? What we have is actually pretty amazing. The sperm themselves are produced in the bottom part of the testes, and then they're actually stored in the upper part, which is called the epididymis. And it takes about 10 weeks for sperm to be developed in the lower portion and actually be stored then in the upper portion because they're mature and ready. Now, when they're stored in the epididymis, they stay there until they're actually ready to be released from the body during sexual intercourse. So how does that all happen? Well, if you see, there's a very long tube here, which is called the vas deferens. And what happens is when a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, are engaging in sexual intercourse, a man will become very sexually aroused, which is also part of God's plan. And at a certain part of the sexual intercourse, there will be something that's called an orgasm. And when that occurs, there's a muscular response that happens in the male that actually pushes the sperm, which actually are joined together with seminal fluid, which helps the fluid, helps the sperm flow. And that seminal fluid actually is produced by the Cowper's gland, the prostate gland, and the seminal vesicles. So fluid is added to the sperm, and then it flows all the way through this tube, comes down through the urethra, and out the penis. Now, when it comes out the penis, of course, it's called an ejaculation. And that is where the semen is actually deposited into the vagina of the man's wife. Now, you may be a little bit confused and say, wait a minute, I thought that this is where a man actually urinates, is through his penis. Well, yes, that's true, but don't be concerned about that, because another wonderful aspect of the Lord's plan, there's a small valve that's located in between the prostate gland and the bladder. And when a man ejaculates during sexual intercourse, that valve acts to preclude any urine from coming through. So again, just another testament to God's miraculous gifts. How does it happen that intercourse can actually take place? Well, the way that it happens is the penis, which is normally very soft and fleshy tissue, fills with blood when a man becomes excited. The penis itself widens, and it becomes very hard, very firm, and it actually lengthens. And I keep referring to this miracle of God's gift, but truly, this is the perfect shape and texture for the penis to have so that it fits so beautifully inside of the woman's body. And this, again, part of that wonderful plan. You may want to sometimes look at boys and think, wow, you know, these guys are just kind of really nutty during puberty, during this time. They just seem to be kind of always hanging around girls and talking about girls, and, you know, what's going on with this? They're driving me crazy. Well, that is just completely normal. And you have to think like this, ladies. If it weren't normal for men to pursue women, we would not have any people in the world. This is, again, part of the plan that men actually need women to complete themselves. Remember we talked earlier about the theology of the body and how man always needs to go outside of himself and find that other that helps him complete himself, just like Adam needed Eve to be complete. Well, men need women to be complete, and God knew this. So he instilled this sexual drive inside of men to reach out and find their partners in life. So it's not a bad thing. What can be bad is when it is not handled appropriately by the young men or by the young women that they are involved with. What do we mean by appropriate? We mean that seeking the companionship of a woman for a man is totally normal, but there always must be that awesome regard and respect for the fact that this sex drive, this ability of people, you and me, men and women, to produce life is an awesome gift that must be respected. And therefore, the respect for one another of boyfriend for girlfriend, girlfriend for boyfriend, husband for wife, wife for husband, the dignity and the respect that we afford one another as men and women, this awesome creation, has to be kept foremost in our brains when we are going through puberty, and indeed for the rest of our lives.
So, just in contrast to men who are at the same level all the time, women have a cyclic fertility. There we have a picture of cycling Carla. This means that a woman's fertility comes and goes every cycle. Women are actually only fertile for a few days during every cycle.
That's right, and
Again, in contrast to the man, all the women's reproductive organs are actually inside, as opposed to the male, whose are outside. The women's are inside her body, protected by her pelvic, the bones of her pelvis. And we'll take a closer look at this picture. Right here we have the ovaries. And the ovaries are a wonderful organ. The ovaries hold the ovum, or the eggs, of the woman. And they also provide the hormones, the progesterone and the estrogen. The uterus, or the womb, is this area here. It's looks and is about the same size as a pear, and it's a muscular organ. And obviously, if a woman is pregnant, it has to expand greatly, much larger than a pear. Now, in between the ovaries and the uterus, we have the fallopian tubes on either side. The fallopian tubes are where the eggs, or where conception actually occurs, when the egg is fertilized and a baby could be conceived. And then we see at the end of the fallopian tubes, right by the ovaries, there's a little funnel shape and with little finger-like projections attached. Those are called fimbria, and the fimbria actually reach out and take an egg and bring it into the fallopian tubes. So it's pretty amazing to see how God is at work in such a small area of our body. And then another area here, we have the endometrium. That's the lining of the uterus. And that's where, if a woman does get pregnant, that is where the baby is implanted and will begin to grow. If a woman does not get pregnant in her cycle, then that lining, the endometrium, is shed, and that becomes her menstrual period. Then we have the neck of this area. This is called the cervix. And the cervix, there are many little pockets. I don't know if you can see those dark little pockets in there. They're called cervical crypts. The cervical crypts produce a special type of mucus, which is important in a woman's fertility. And then the cervix opens up into the vagina. The vagina is the passageway from the uterus to the outside of the woman's body. And the vagina is the place where the husband would place his erect penis and deposit his sperm into the woman in their loving marital embrace. And so the wife then receives the gift of the husband. She receives him fully and completely in his physical body, and she in return gives herself completely to her husband, body, heart, and soul. So the act of intercourse is called the marital act, because it's really meant to be between a bride and a groom, a husband and a wife, who are fully, faithfully, and forever committed to each other in love. In God's plan, this loving commitment is also meant to be fruitful. It can be fruitful in many ways in strengthening the couple's bonds of love for each other, and it can also be fruitful in producing a new life, a new human person who is an image of God. And in this case, if a new life is produced, the vagina will also become the birth canal when a baby is born. Next, we're going to take a closer look at the ovary itself. The ovary is pretty amazing, all of the things that can happen in that little organ. A woman is actually born with all the eggs that she will ever have. She has about 500,000 eggs in your body right now. It's pretty amazing. Throughout your lifetime, though, only about 500 of those eggs will ever go through this maturing process that we're going to talk about. So about once a month or once a cycle, an egg will be chosen, and it'll be chosen to mature. The egg will be caught up in a balloon-like structure called a follicle. The follicle will continue to grow, and it secretes the estrogen, the hormone estrogen. Estrogen stimulates the cervical crypts to secrete mucus, that mucus that we had talked about before ovulation. At ovulation, the follicle, which has been maturing, it bursts and comes out of the ovary, and so that when the follicle bursts, there is a structure that remains. This is that yellow part that we see. That's the corpus luteum, or the yellow body. The yellow body secretes the hormone progesterone, which, along with estrogen, prepare the lining of the uterus for the implantation of a new life. If there happens to be no pregnancy, then that yellow body will degenerate and become part of the shedding of the menstrual cycle, or of the menstrual period.
All right, so let's take a little bit closer look at that menstrual cycle. I know we always refer to a woman's period, but it's really important to understand what actually makes up a woman's period. What does it mean actually when we say that a woman is having her period? When we make that comment, what it means is the woman is experiencing her menstrual flow when we say that a woman is having her period, which appears in the form of blood. But it's not only blood. It's blood in a very, very rich mixture of nutrients that come from the inside of the uterus, as Erin was telling us about. The inside of the uterus sheds when a baby is not conceived. When no baby implants itself inside of the uterus, that lining is shed. And that's what we call a woman's menstrual flow. But that's not really her period. The period is something that is cyclical, as we talked about earlier with cycling Carla. And it actually starts, day one of the period would be when the menstrual flow starts. So if we count that as day one, that stretch of time usually lasts about 5 to 7 days. And then there's a period after the menstrual flow ceases of about 14 days where the body would begin to prepare itself again for the fertilization of a new egg. The egg's not released yet. The menstrual flow stops, and then the body would, the egg that did not become a new life is expelled from the body, and the body starts to prepare itself all over again. Now, a lot of people think, or they're very confused about when can a woman actually become pregnant. It's a really important concept to understand that women have different cycles. Probably, some of you mothers sitting in here could attest to the fact that, you may have one kind of cycle, and, your sisters, for example, may have a cycle that's different from yours. And actually, there are 3 kinds of cycle. There's kind of a very lengthy cycle. There's a sort of an average or medium cycle, and then there's a cycle that can be relatively short. And if we take a look at this diagram here, you can actually see that ovulation would occur at a different point. If you have let's say a normal menstrual cycle, which is about 28 days, from the start of one menstrual flow to the start of the next menstrual flow, you would ovulate about here. Looks like just about right in the middle, doesn't it, Erin? Very close. If you have a short period, a short cycle, which is probably about 20 days, you can see that ovulation looks like it's taking place a lot sooner in the cycle. If you have a very lengthy menstrual cycle, and again, remember, the cycle is from the beginning of the menstrual flow in one month to the beginning of the menstrual flow in the following month. If you have a very long cycle, sometimes can go from 28 to 35 days, it looks like ovulation is taking place later, doesn't it? Well, there's a very important key to understanding how ovulation takes place, and that is, no matter what kind of cycle you have, ladies, you will always ovulate very close to 14 days before the beginning of your next menstrual flow. And that's a source of a lot of confusion for many young women. So just make sure that you understand that ovulation will take place approximately 2 weeks before the start of your next flow.
Let's take a closer look at the endometrium, the lining of the uterus. The lining of the uterus is what will become the nest, as we could say, for the baby. So up here we have the egg. We have the ovarian follicle with the egg in it, starting to grow and develop. here it's growing. And if you look along here, you can see the lining of the endometrium and how it follows the growth. As the estrogen begins to increase, estrogen increasing as the follicle grows, so also the endometrium begins to increase, and the lining becomes thicker and develops different glands and blood vessels. And after the point of ovulation then, the yellow body is formed up at the top, and we have progesterone now coming into play here. When the hormone progesterone is secreted, then the glands fill up with nutrients. You can see how these glands are really getting larger, and they're filling up with nutrients to prepare to support the baby until it would develop its own support system, the placenta. And so it's built up. Then if pregnancy does not occur, you can see how it begins going down right away with the start of the menstrual flow. And then the amazing process all begins again. Now here we're going to take a little bit of a look at the cervix. And this is a close-up of the cervix. You can see the cervical crypts in there. This is an enlarged diagram, obviously, and the cervical crypts, again, produce that mucus that's so important in a woman's fertility. So during the fertile phase of each normal menstrual cycle, there's a healthy cervical mucus that comes. And the mucus discharge is because of that rising estrogen. So we see we have an estrogen type of mucus that's rising before ovulation. And if you take a close look at what that mucus looks like, you can see that there are different channels and strands. And those are to enable the sperm to slide right up there. They can swim right through that and easily get in to reach the egg. Then the mucus, at that point, the woman's mucus is stretchy, slippery, and a woman can actually even feel and observe that mucus at the opening of her vagina. After ovulation, when the progesterone begins taking over, you can see how it's changed and it's become so close, and it's really gotten thick and dense. And this provides a barrier or a plug in the cervix, so that now the sperm can't find a way to enter. They can't get up there to reach anything. So a woman actually doesn't feel that mucus because it stays in the cervix.
Okay, well, you may be asking yourself, all right, well, so during ovulation, I understand that an egg's released, and I understand that that's when a woman can become pregnant during that ovulation cycle. But how many times can she get pregnant? I mean, how many opportunities does she have every month to get pregnant? Well, it's important for you to know and to understand that actually a woman only ovulates one time per month, one time in her cycle. Then you may ask yourself, hey, well, what about twins? I mean, how do twins happen? If she only ovulates once, then there's like only one egg. Well, that happens because even though she's ovulating, sometimes 2 eggs will be released. And if 2 sperm reach both of those eggs, then of course we have a set of fraternal twins. So sometimes it does happen, again, according to God's plan, that more than 1 egg is released. But if more than 1 egg is released, it will be released during that same period that that ovulation takes place. So you're not going to have, for example, 1 egg released 1 week and then a week later another egg released. They're both going to be released very closely to one another, very, very closely. So that's important to understand and kind of keep